You know what time it is? Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! We are back. We are back with Storytime with Chris. Hi, y'all. It's Monday. A couple of things did not go my way as planned, but that's okay. Things are getting fixed. It's okay. They always say don't cry over spilled milk, and that's not what I'm trying to do. Things will be taken care of. As my card says, be humble, for you are made of earth. And I will continue to be humble. I hope everybody's having a great day. I do not own the music that you are listening to in the background. Brought to you by Holiday Music. Holiday Music on YouTube. Shout out to them. But we are back. So we're at chapter 18. And then Wednesday we'll start 19. So we only have 2 more chapters left. And then we're done with Howl's Moving Castle. Thank you all so much for joining me on days like this. Like I always say, you do not have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them on the YouTube channel when I upload them. So without further ado, we will begin. Chapter 18, in which the Scarecrow and Miss Angoria reappear. They open the flower shop the next day. As Howl had pointed out, it could not have been simpler. Every early morning, all they had to do was to open the door with the knob purple down and go out into the swimming green haze to gather flowers. It soon became a routine. Sophie took her stick and her scissors and stumped out, chatting to her stick, using it to test the squashy ground or hook down sprays of high-up choice roses. Michael took an invention of his own, which he was very proud of. It was a large tin tub with water in it, which floated in the air and followed Michael wherever he went among the bushes. The dog man went too. He had a wonderful time rushing about the wet green lanes, chasing butterflies or trying to catch the tiny bright birds that fed on the flowers. While he dashed about, Sophie cut armloads of long irises or lilies or broad frondy orange flowers or branches of blue hibiscus, and Michael loaded the bath with orchids, roses, starry white flowers, shiny vermilion ones, or anything that caught his fancy. They all enjoyed this time. Then before the heat in the bushes grew too intense, they took the day's flowers back to the shop and arranged them in a motley collection of jugs and buckets which Howl had dug out of the yard. 2 of the buckets were actually the 7-league boots. Nothing, Sophie thought as she arranged shocks of gladiolus in them, could show how completely Howl had lost interest in Letty. He did not care now if Letty had Sophie used them or not. Howl was nearly always missing while they gathered flowers, and the doorknob was always turned black down. He was usually back for a late breakfast, looking dreamy, still in his black clothes. He would never tell Sophie which suit the black one really was. "I'm in mourning for Mrs. Penstemen," was all he would say. "If you want to talk to a school teacher, you have to catch her before school starts." Then he would disappear into the bathroom for the next 2 hours. Meanwhile, Sophie and Michael put on their fine clothes and opened the shop. Howl insisted on the fine clothes. He said it would attract custom. Sophie insisted they all wore aprons, and after the first few days, when the people of market shipping simply stared through the window and did not come into the shop became very popular. Word had gone round that Jenkins had flowers like no flowers had ever seen before. People Sophie had known all her life came and brought flowers by the bundle. None of them recognized her, and that made her feel very odd. They all thought she was Howl's old mother, but Sophie had had enough of being Howl's old mother. "I'm his aunt," she told Mrs. Cesare. She became known as Aunt Jenkins, or Auntie Jenkins, or Aunt Jenkins. Auntie sounds better than aunt. I don't know. Pronunciation. Potato, potato. Tomato, tomato. By the time Howl arrived in the shop in a black apron to match his suit, he usually found it quite busy. He made it busier still. This was when Sophie began to be sure that the black suit was really the charmed scarlet and gray one. Any lady Howl served was sure to go away with at least twice the number of flowers she had asked for. Most of the time, Howl charmed them into buying 10 times as much. Before long, Sophie noticed ladies peering in and deciding not to come into the shop when they saw Howl there. She did not blame them. If you just wanted a rose for a bundle, you did not want to be forced to buy 3 dozen orchids. She did not discourage Howl when Howl took to spending long hours in the workshed across the yard. "I'm setting up defenses against the witch, before you ask," he said. "By the time I've finished, there'll be no way she could get into any part of this place." There was sometimes a problem with leftover flowers. Sophie could not bear to see them wilting overnight. She could She found she could keep them fairly fresh if she talked to them. After that, she talked to flowers a lot. She got Michael to make her a plant nutrition spell, and she experimented in buckets in the sink and in tubs in the alcove where she used to trim hats. She found she could keep some plants fresh for days, so of course she experimented some more. She got the soot out of the yard and planted things in there, muttering busily. She grew a navy blue rose like that, which pleased her greatly. Its buds were coal black, and its flowers opened bluer and bluer until they became almost the same blue, as calcifer. Sophie was so delighted with it that she took roots from all the bags hanging on the beams and experimented with those. She told herself she had never been happier in her life. This was not true. Something was wrong, and Sophie could not understand what. Sometimes she thought it was the way no one in Market Chipping recognized her. She did not dare go and see Martha, for fear Martha would not know her either. She did not dare tip up the flowers out of the 7-league boots and go and see Letty for the same reason. She could not bear either of her sisters to see her as an old woman. Michael went off with bunches of spare flowers to see Martha all the time. Sometimes Sophie thought that was what was the matter with her. Michael was so cheerful, and she was left on her own in the shop more and more often, but that did not seem to be quite it. Sophie enjoyed selling flowers all on her own. Sometimes the trouble seemed to be Calcifer. Calcifer was bored. He had nothing to do except to keep the castle gently drifting along the lanes of grass and round the various pools and lakes to make sure that they arrived in a new spot with new flowers every morning. His blue face was always leaning eagerly out of the grate when Sophie and Michael came in with their flowers. "I want to see what it's like out there," he said. Sophie brought him tasty-smelling leaves to burn, which made the castle room smell as strongly as the bathroom. But Calcifer said what he really wanted was company. They went into the shop all day and left him alone. So Sophie made Michael serve in the shop for at least an hour every morning while she went and talked to Calcifer. She invented guessing games to keep Calcifer occupied when she was busy. But Calcifer was still discontented. "When are you going to break my contract with Howl?" he asked more and more often. And Sophie put Calcifer off. "I'm working on it," she said. "It won't be long now." This was not quite true. Sophie had stopped thinking of it unless she had to. When she put together what Mrs. Penstemon had said with all the things Howl and Calcifer had said, she found that she had some strong and rather terrible ideas about that contract. She was sure that breaking it would be the end of both Howl and Calcifer. Howl might deserve it, but Calcifer did not, and since Howl seemed to be working quite hard in order to slither out of the rest of the witch's curse, Sophie wanted to do nothing unless she could help. Sometimes Sophie thought it was simply that the dog-man was getting her down. He was such a doleful creature. The only time he seemed to enjoy himself was when he chased down the green lanes between the bushes every morning. For the rest of the day he trudged gloomily about after Sophie, sighing deeply. As Sophie could not do nothing about him either, she was rather glad when the weather grew hotter and hotter toward Midsummer Day, and the dog-man took to lying in patches of shade out in the yard, panting. Meanwhile, the roots Sophie had planted had become quite interesting. The onion had become a small palm tree with sprouting little onion-scented nuts. Another root grew into a sort of pink sunflower. Only one was slow to grow. When at last it put out 2 round green leaves, Sophie could hardly wait to see what it would grow into. The next day, it looked as though it might have been an orchid. Its pointed leaves sprouted with mauve and a long stalk growing out of the middle with a large bud on it. The day after that, Sophie left the fresh flowers in the tin bath and hurriedly, eagerly, to the alcove to see how it was getting on. Thank you, Rhodesia. Thank you. The bud had opened into a pink flower like an orchid that had been through a mangle. It was flat and joined to the stalk just below a round tip. There were 4 petals sprouting from a plum pink middle, 2 pointing downward and 2 more halfway up that stuck out sideways. While Sophie stared at it, a strong scent of spring flowers warned her that Howl had come in and was standing behind her. "What is that thing?" he said. "If you were expecting an ultraviolet violet or an infrared geranium, you got it wrong, Mrs. Mad Scientist." "It looks to me like a squashed baby flower," Michael said, coming to look. It did, too. Howl shot Michael an alarmed look and picked up the flower in its pot. He slid it out of the pot into his hand, where he carefully separated the white thready roots and the soot and the remains of the manure spell, until he uncovered the brown, forked root Sophie had grown it from. "I might have guessed," he said. "It's a mandrake root." Sophie strikes again. "You do have a touch, don't you, Sophie?" He put the plant carefully back, passed it to Sophie, and went away looking rather pale. So, spoiler alert, All of my friends who are Harry Potter fans, despite the wretched opinion of the brilliant author that made that series, anybody knows what mandrake roots are. You know they are very dangerous to normal human beings in the world of fantasy. Because mandrakes, if you pull them up and disturb them, they scream so loud that they will make you pass out. So yes, be careful when pulling up a mandrake root, kids. Be careful. So that was almost all the curses come true. Sophie thought as she went to arrange the fresh flowers in the shop window. The mandrake root had a baby. They only left one more thing, the wind to advance an honest mind. If that meant Howl's mind had to be honest, Sophie thought there was a chance that the curse might never come true. She told herself it served Howl right anyway for going courting Miss Angoria every morning in a charmed suit, but she still felt alarmed and guilty. She arranged a sheaf of white lilies in a 7-league boot. She crawled into the window to get them just so, and she heard a regular clump, clump, clump from outside in the street. It was not the sound of a horse. It was the sound of a stick hitting the stones. Sophie's heart was behaving oddly even before she dared look out the window. There, sure enough, came the Scarecrow, hopping slowly and purposefully down the center of the street. The rags trailing from its outstretched arms were fewer and grayer, and the turnip of its face was withered into a look of determination, as if it had hopped ever since Howl turned it away, until it at last hopped its way back. Sophie was not the only one to be scared. The few people about that early were running away from the Scarecrow as hard as they could run, but the Scarecrow took no notice and hopped on. Sophie hid her face from it. "We're not here," she told it in a fierce whisper. "You don't know we're here. You can't find us. Hop away fast." Clump, clump of the hopping stick slowed as the Scarecrow neared the shop. Sophie wanted to scream for Howl, but all she seemed to be able to do was to go on repeating, "We're not here. Go away," repeating quickly. And the hopping sped it up, just as she told it to, and the Scarecrow hopped its way past the shop and out upon Market Chipping. Sophie thought she was going on to come over queer, but she seemed just to have been holding her breath, which is what you tend to do when you're very scared or startled by something you're not expecting to see. It's like seeing an old friend or an ex that you're not wanting to see, and then they show up at your place of work, and you're just like, I can't believe this person is here. She took a deep breath and felt shaky with relief. When the Scarecrow came back, she could send it away again. Howl had gone out when Sophie went into the castle room. "He seemed awfully upset," Michael said. Sophie looked at the door. The knob was blacked out. Not that upset, she thought. Michael went out too, to Cesari's that morning, and Sophie was alone in the shop. It was very hot, and the flowers wilted in spite of the spells, and very few people seemed to want to buy any. What with this and that mandrake root and the Scarecrow, all Sophie's feelings seemed to come to a head. She was downright miserable. "It might be the curse hovering to catch up with Howl," she sighed to the flowers, "but I think it's being the eldest, really. Look at me. I set out to seek my fortune, and I ended up exactly where I started, old as the hills still." Here the dog-man put his glossy red snout round the door to the yard and whined. Sophie sighed. Never an hour passed without the creature checking up on her. "Yes, I'm still here," she said. "Where do you expect me to be?" The dog came inside the shop. He sat up and stretched his paws out stiffly in front of him. Sophie realized he was trying to turn into a man. Poor creature. She tried to be nice to him because he was, after all, worse off than she was. "Try harder," she said. "Put your back into it. You can be a man if you want." The dog stretched and straightened his back, and strained, and just as Sophie was sure he was going to have to give up or topple over backward, he managed to rise up to his hind legs and heave himself up into a distraught, ginger-haired man. "I envy Howl," he panted. "Does that so easily. I was dog in the hedge. You helped. Toad Letty, I knew you. I'd keep watch. I was here before in..." He began to double up again into a dog and howled with annoyance. "With witch and shop!" He wailed and fell forward onto his hands, growing a great deal of gray and white hair as he did so. Sophie stared at the large, shaggy dog that now stood there. "You were with the witch?" she said. She remembered now the anxious, ginger-haired man who had stared at her in horror. "You know who I am, and you know I am under a spell. Does Letty know, too?" The huge, shaggy head nodded. Which, if you remember, y'all, early in the story, Sophie did help a dog that was stuck in a bush. This is the same dog. See how things come full circle? And she called you Gaston, Sophie remembered. Oh, my friend, she has made it hard for you. Fancy having all that hair in this weather. You'd better go somewhere cool. The dog nodded again and shambled miserably into the yard. But why did Letty send you? Sophie wondered. She felt thoroughly put out and disturbed by this discovery. She went up the stairs and through the broom cupboard to talk to Cassifer. Cassifer was not much help. It doesn't make any difference how many people know you're under a spell, he said. It hasn't helped the dog much, has it? No, Sophie began, but just then the castle door clicked and opened. Sophie and Cassifer looked. They saw the doorknob was still set to black down, and they expected Howl to come through. It was hard to say which of them was more astonished when the person who slid rather cautiously round the door turned out to be Miss Angorian. Miss Angorian was equally astonished. Oh, I beg your pardon, she said. I thought Mr. Jenkins might be here. He's out, Sophie said stiffly, and she wondered where Howl had gone, if not to see Miss Angorian. Miss Angorian let go of the door, which she had been clutching in her surprise. She left it swinging open on nothing and came pleadingly towards Sophie. Sophie found she had got up herself and came across the room. It seemed as if she was trying to block Miss Angorian off. Please, said Miss Angorian, don't tell Mr. Jenkins I was here. To tell you the truth, I only encouraged him in hope of getting news of my fiancé, Ben Sullivan, you know. I'm positive Ben disappeared to the same place Mr. Jenkins keeps disappearing to. Only Ben didn't come back. There's no Mr. Sullivan here, Sophie said, and she thought, that's Wizard Solomon's name. I don't believe a word of it. Oh, I know that, Miss Angorian said. This feels like the right place. Do you mind if I just look around a little to give myself some idea of the sort of life Ben's leading now? She hooked her sheet of black hair behind one ear and tried to walk further into the room. Sophie stood in the way. This forced Miss Angorian to tiptoe pleadingly away sideways toward the workbench. How very quaint, she said, looking at the bottles and the jars. What a quaint little town, she said, looking out of the window. It's called Market Chipping, Sophie said, and she moved round and herded Miss Angorian back toward the door. What's up those stairs? Miss Angorian asked, pointing to the open door to the stairs. Howl's private room, Sophie said firmly, walking Miss Angorian away backward. What's through that other open door? Miss Angorian asked. A flower shop, said Sophie. Nosy Parker, she thought. Which I still use that term for somebody who's trying to be all up in my business. Somebody's being a nosy Parker. By this time, Miss Angorian either had to back into the chair or out through the door again. She stared at Cassifer in a vague, frowning way, as if she was not sure what she was seeing, and Cassifer simply stared back without saying a word. This made Sophie feel better about being so very unfriendly. Only people who understood Cassifer were really welcome in Howl's house. But now Miss Angorian made a dive round the chair and noticed Howl's guitar leaning in its corner. She snatched it up with a gasp and turned round, holding it to her chest possessively. Where did you get this? She demanded in a low, emotional voice. Ben had a guitar like this. It could be Ben's. I heard Howl brought it last winter, Sophie said, and she walked forward again, trying to scoop Miss Angorian out of her corner and through the door. Something's happened to Ben, Miss Angorian said throbbingly. He would have never been parted from his guitar. Where is he? I know he can't be dead. I'd know in my heart if he were. Sophie wondered whether to tell Miss Angorian that the witch had caught Wizard Solomon. She looked across to see where the human skull was. She had half a mind to wave it in Mrs. Angorian's face to say it was Wizard Solomon's, but the skull was in the sink hidden behind a bucket of spare ferns and lilies, and she knew that if she went over there, Miss Angorian would ooze out into the room again. Besides, it would be unkind. May I take this guitar? Miss Angorian said huskily, clutching it to her. To remind me of Ben. The throb in Miss Angorian's voice annoyed Sophie. No, she said, there's no need to be so intense about it. You've no proof it was his. She hobbled close to Miss Angorian and seized the guitar by its neck. Miss Angorian stared at it over with wide, anguished eyes. Sophie dragged. Miss Angorian hung on. The guitar gave out horrible, out-of-tune jangles. Sophie jerked it out of Mrs. Angorian's arms. Don't be silly, she said. You've no right to walk into people's castles and take their guitars. I've told you Mr. Sullivan's not here. Now go back to Wales. Go on. And she used the guitar to push Miss Angorian backward through the open door. Miss Angorian backed into the nothingness until half of her vanished. You're hard, she said reproachfully. Yes, I am, said Sophie, and slammed the door on her. She turned the knob to orange down to prevent Miss Angorian coming back and dumped the guitar back in its corner with a firm twang. And don't you dare tell Howl she was here, she said unreasonably to Calcifer. I bet she came to see Howl. The rest was just a pack of lies. Wizard Solomon was settled here years ago. He probably came to get away from her beastly throbbing voice. Calcifer chuckled. I've never seen anyone got rid of so fast, he said. This made Sophie feel both unkind and guilty. After all, she herself had walked into the castle in much the same way, and she had been twice as nosy as Miss Angorian. Gah, she said. She stumbled into the bathroom and stared at the withered old face in the mirrors. She picked up one of the labels called Skin and then tossed it down again. Even young and fresh, she did not think her face compared particularly well with Miss Angorian's. Gah, she said. Oh, she hobbled rapidly back and seized ferns and lilies from the sink. She hobbled them, dripping to the shop where she rammed them into a bucket of nutrition spell. Be daffodils, she told them in a mad, angry, croaking voice. Be daffodils in June, you beastly things. The dog man put his shaggy face round the door. When he saw the mood Sophie was in, he backed out again, hurriedly. Yes. When Michael came merrily in with a large pie a minute later, Sophie gave him such a glare that Michael instantly remembered to spell how it asked him to make up and fled away through the broom cupboard. Gah! Sophie snarled after him. She bent over her bucket again. Be daffodils! Be daffodils! She croaked. It did not make her feel any better that she knew it was a silly way to behave. Chapter 19. Oh, hold on. I was about to go on. That's where we're going to end for today. Carmen, I'm sorry. I love you. I know you just came in to watch, but I just ended the chapter. I'm very, very sorry. But like I said, y'all, all of the episodes will be up on the channel. I do appreciate y'all being patient with me. Like I said, typically here's what happens. If I am the closing server at my job, I typically will start Storytime at like 7:30 on Facebook. If I'm the opening server, which I am today, I typically will try to do it earlier in the afternoon after a much needed nap. Naps are okay, y'all. It's okay to take a nap. Just don't take them for like super long, because I used to take 2-hour naps. Nowadays, I just take an hour and 15 nap, or an hour and 30 minutes at the most. But as always, love you all. I appreciate your support. See you later.